I moved into my apartment in October, 2 months before Christmas. It was a good deal for the area, 3rd floor, 1 bedroom, quiet building, older neighbors who mostly kept to themselves. The kind of place where you go a full week without seeing another tenant in the hallway. I liked that. I'd just come out of a long relationship and the silence felt like something I'd earned. By December, I had the place set up the way I wanted it. A few plants on the windowsill, a second-hand couch I actually liked. I put up a small Christmas tree in the corner, fake, about 3 feet tall with white lights. Nothing elaborate. I wasn't expecting company. I was spending Christmas alone for the first time in 6 years, and I'd made peace with that. Then the present showed up. It was December 23rd, a Tuesday. I came home from work around 6:30, took the elevator to the 3rd floor, and when I turned the corner toward my apartment, I almost tripped over it. A box, sitting directly in front of my door, medium-sized, maybe 12 inches square, wrapped in red paper with a white ribbon tied in a neat bow on top. No tag, no card, nothing written anywhere on the outside. I stood there looking at it for a moment. My first thought was that it was a mistake. Someone had left it at the wrong door. I checked the number on my door, 3F. I looked up and down the hallway, empty. I picked it up. It was light. Whatever was inside didn't weigh much. I brought it inside and set it on my kitchen counter. I made dinner. I watched television. Every 20 minutes or so, I'd glance over at it, sitting there in its neat red wrapping, and think about opening it, and then think about how that felt strange. Opening a present that wasn't addressed to me, even if it was left at my door. I went to bed without opening it. The next morning, Christmas Eve, I knocked on a few doors in the building. The couple in 3D, the older woman in 3B. I described the box and asked if anyone had left something at the wrong apartment. Nobody had. The woman in 3B said she'd seen nothing unusual in the hallway the previous evening. The couple in 3D hadn't left their apartment all day. I went back to my place and stood in the kitchen looking at the box for a long time. Then I opened it. The ribbon came off easily. The paper was taped neatly. Not overly so, just enough. Inside the paper was a plain white cardboard box, the kind you'd get from a department store. I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in white tissue paper, was a photograph. I picked it up. It was a picture of me. I was walking down the street, 2 blocks from my apartment. I was wearing my gray jacket, the one I'd bought in November. I was looking at my phone. The angle was from across the street, slightly elevated like it had been taken from a 2nd floor window or a fire escape. I flipped it over. The back was blank. I stood there holding the photograph for a long time. Then I looked back in the box. There wasn't just one photograph. I counted them after I stopped shaking enough to handle them carefully. 31 photographs. 1 for each day of October. 1 for each day of November, and 23 for December. Every single day from the 1st to the 23rd, the day before I found the box. They were all of me. Some were taken outside, on my walk to the subway, at the grocery store, coming out of the gym. Others were taken through windows. My kitchen window, my living room window. One was taken through the window of a coffee shop I went to maybe twice a week, me sitting at the table by the wall with my laptop open, not looking up. I am on the 3rd floor. My windows face the building across the alley. Someone in that building had been watching me for 2 months, and I had never once thought to look back. The last photograph in the stack, the one from December 23rd, the day the box appeared, was different from the others. The others were taken from a distance, somewhat grainy, clearly shot with a zoom lens. This one was close. I was asleep in my bed. The angle was from inside my bedroom. Whoever had been watching me from across the alley had at some point been inside my apartment. I called the police that morning. 2 officers came, looked at the photographs, took them as evidence, and told me to change my locks immediately. They asked if I had any idea who might have done this. I didn't. They asked if I'd noticed anything unusual in the past 2 months. I said no, and that was the truth. I had noticed nothing. That was the part that stayed with me long after the officers left. 31 days of October, 30 days of November, 23 days of December, 84 photographs. And I had not noticed a single thing. I changed my locks that afternoon. I bought blackout curtains for every window. I slept at a friend's place for 2 weeks. When I came back, I went through every inch of my apartment, looking for anything that shouldn't be there. Cameras, devices, anything. I found nothing. The police never identified anyone. I still live in the apartment. The tree is still in the corner with its white lights. I keep the curtains closed now, even during the day. Sometimes, I wonder if the photographs are still being taken. I don't have a way to know for certain that they aren't. I hadn't been back to my parents' house in 5 years. It wasn't a dramatic thing. No falling out, no big event, just distance and work, and the way time passes faster than you expect when you're in your late 20s and your life is somewhere other than where you grew up. My parents never pushed. They were the kind of people who said whenever you're ready and meant it. I was ready in December 20 to 24, or I thought I was. I drove up on the 23rd, 6 hours through flat gray highway, the sky the color of old cement. Snow starting somewhere around the state line. I knew the last stretch of road so well I could have driven it half asleep. The curve past the grain elevator, the long straight mile before the water tower, the turn onto Millbrook Road where the trees on both sides made a tunnel in the summer and now just stood there bare and black against the white. The house looked the same from the outside. White siding, green shutters, the big oak in the front yard that my dad had been threatening to cut down for 20 years. Christmas lights along the roof line, the same strand of multicolored bulbs they'd used since I was a kid. My mom met me at the door. We hugged for a long time. My dad shook my hand and then hugged me too, which he didn't always do. We had dinner. We caught up. Everything felt warm and easy and exactly the way I'd told myself it would. I went to bed that night thinking I should have come back sooner. I woke up at 2:17 in the morning thinking something is wrong. I don't know what woke me. Not a sound exactly. More like the absence of one. The particular quality of silence that isn't restful but alert. The kind that makes the hair on your arms stand up without knowing why. I lay in my old bed in my old room, looking at the ceiling. My phone said 2:17. The house was quiet. I could hear the furnace running. I could hear the wind outside. I got up and went to the bathroom. On the way back, I stopped in the hallway. The door to the linen closet was open. This sounds like nothing. I know how it sounds. But that closet had a latch. A small metal latch that you had to press deliberately to open, and I had never once in my entire childhood seen that door swing open on its own. My dad was particular about it because the shelves were deep and things fell out if it wasn't properly closed. I pushed it shut. I heard the latch click. I went back to bed. In the morning, I came downstairs and the kitchen chairs were wrong. We had 4 chairs around the kitchen table. When I was growing up, they always sat the same way. My dad at the head near the window, my mom across from him, me and my sister on the sides. Force of habit, 20 years of the same arrangement. That morning, 2 of the chairs were pulled out from the table at angles like people had just gotten up from them. Not my parents' chairs, the 2 side chairs, mine and my sister's. My sister had been dead for 3 years. I stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at those chairs for a long time before my mom came in behind me and said good morning and went to the coffee maker without seeming to notice anything. "Mom," I said, "did you move the chairs?" She looked at them. She said, "Your father must have." I didn't say anything else. Over the next 2 days, I kept a list in my phone, a private note I added to whenever something felt off. I didn't tell my parents I was doing it. The list by Christmas Eve looked like this: linen closet open at 2 a.m., kitchen chairs moved, side chairs, not parents' chairs, the photograph of Sarah on the mantle, facing slightly different direction than I remember. May be wrong about this. Dad's reading glasses on the floor in the hallway. He never leaves them on the floor. Back door unlocked at 11 p.m. Dad swore he locked it before dinner. Smell of cigarette smoke in the upstairs hallway around midnight. Neither of my parents smoke. Sarah smoked. I want to be careful about how I describe this next part because I'm aware of how it sounds, and I'm aware that grief does things to perception that are hard to account for. My sister had been gone 3 years, and I hadn't been back to the house since the funeral, and I was sleeping in my childhood bedroom and eating at the same table where we'd eaten 1,000 meals together. I know all of that, but I also know what I found in the basement on Christmas Eve. I went down to get a box of ornaments my mom had asked me to bring up. The basement was the same as it always was. My dad's workbench along one wall, storage shelves along the other, the water heater in the corner, a single bulb in the ceiling that you pulled with a string. The ornament boxes were on the bottom shelf near the stairs. I grabbed them and was heading back up when I noticed the door to the utility room was ajar. That room had a lock, a padlock on the outside. My parents had used it for storage, holiday decorations, old furniture, things they weren't ready to throw away. I'd never thought much about it. The padlock was open, hanging from the latch, open. I pushed the door with my foot. Inside, in the center of the small room, was a folding chair facing the door, and on the floor next to the chair, a coffee mug, not dusty, not old, the kind of not dusty that means recently used. I bent down and put my hand around it, still warm. I went upstairs and I told my parents what I found. My dad went pale. My mom started crying before I finished the sentence. They told me, and this is the part I hadn't known, the part they hadn't told me in 3 years of phone calls and holidays spent apart, that 6 months after Sarah died, they had started noticing things too. Small things at first, then less small. They had changed the locks twice. They had called the police once, who found nothing. They had told each other it was grief. It was the house settling. It was their imaginations working against them the way imaginations do when you are trying to survive the unsurvivable. They had never told me because they didn't want me to worry. We spent Christmas Eve sitting in the kitchen with every light in the house on. My dad put a new padlock on the utility room door. We didn't talk about Sarah, and we didn't talk about what I'd found, and we watched old movies until we all fell asleep in the living room because none of us wanted to be alone in a room. I drove home on the 26th. I haven't been back since. I don't know what was in that room. I don't know how long it had been using that chair. I don't know how it got in, or where it went, or whether it's still there. My parents still live in that house. They tell me everything is fine now. I don't know whether to believe them. I want to be upfront about something before I tell this story. I am not a superstitious person. I'm an engineer. I believe in things I can measure. When my kids were little and they asked me if Santa was real, I told them yes for as long as I could, and then sat them down and explained the truth clearly and kindly when the time came. I mention this because I want you to understand the kind of person I am and why what happened on Christmas Eve 3 years ago has no satisfying explanation that I've been able to come up with. My wife and I have 2 kids, a boy who was 8 at the time and a girl who was 5. We live in a house in the suburbs, the kind of neighborhood where everyone puts up lights in December and the kids go trick-or-treating in a big group and you know most of your neighbors by first name. The kind of neighborhood where nothing happens. We put the kids to bed at 9 on Christmas Eve. We finished wrapping the last few presents, arranged them under the tree, hung the stockings properly, and were in bed ourselves by 11:30. Standard Christmas Eve routine. I woke up at 3:08 in the morning. The sound was from above me, from the roof, a scraping sound, slow and heavy, like something large shifting its weight across the shingles. I lay there listening to it and telling myself it was a branch. We had a big maple in the backyard whose branches hung over the right side of the roof. Ice accumulation, wind, a raccoon maybe. They got into everything in our neighborhood. The scraping stopped. I waited. Nothing. I looked at my phone. 3:09. I put it down and closed my eyes. Then I heard my daughter laugh. One short laugh. The bright, surprised kind she made when something delighted her, coming from her room down the hall. I was out of bed before I finished processing what I'd heard. I moved fast and quiet the way you do when your instincts are ahead of your thinking. Her door was half open. We always left it half open so the nightlight in the hallway reached her room. She was asleep, sound asleep, on her side. with her stuffed rabbit tucked under her arm. Her face was completely still. Whatever she'd been dreaming, she was deep in it. I stood in the doorway of my 5-year-old daughter's room at 3 in the morning and looked at every corner of it and saw nothing unusual. I checked the window. Locked. I checked under the bed. She had a low frame with storage boxes underneath. No space to hide anything. I looked in the closet. Clothes, shoes, a basket of stuffed animals. I went back to bed. I almost made it to sleep. At 3:24, I heard the front door. Not opening, not closing. The specific sound of the deadbolt, a single clunk, the mechanism turning. I knew that sound the way you know all the sounds of your own house. I grabbed my phone and went downstairs. The front door was closed. The deadbolt was locked. I checked the handle. Locked. I checked the chain. On. I stood in the front hallway and looked at the door and then turned around and looked at the living room. Something was different. It took me several seconds to identify it because my brain kept skipping over it, the way your eyes skip over things that don't fit into a category. The tree was the same. The lights were still on, and we left them on a timer overnight. The stockings were hanging, but the presents under the tree were wrong. We had put 9 presents under the tree before bed. I knew the number because I'd arranged them myself. There were now 14, 5 boxes I had never seen before. Wrapped differently from ours, we used red and green paper, the same rolls we'd been buying from the same drugstore for years. These 5 were wrapped in white paper, perfectly, almost mechanically neat. No bows, no tags. I stood in my living room at 3:24 in the morning, looking at 5 presents that hadn't been there when I went to bed, and I did not touch them and I did not open them. I called the police. 2 officers arrived within 15 minutes. They searched the house, every room, every closet, the basement, the garage. They found no one. No signs of forced entry anywhere. Every window locked. Every door locked. One of the officers asked me if I was certain about the number of presents. I told him I was. He wrote something in his notepad and looked at his partner. They took the 5 white presents as evidence. Before they bagged them, one of the officers shook each one lightly, checking for weight. He didn't say anything about what he felt inside them, and I didn't ask. Some part of me had already decided I didn't want to know. My wife had come downstairs by then. She was holding our daughter, who had woken up from the activity and was confused and sleepy and not yet frightened. Our son slept through the entire thing. The officers told us to stay with family for a few days while they looked into it. We drove to my in-laws' house at 4:30 in the morning on Christmas Day, kids still in their pajamas, my daughter clutching her rabbit, my son barely awake, asking in a small voice why we were leaving. I told him Santa had already come and we were going to celebrate with Grandma. He believed me. He was 8 and he'd already been told the truth about Santa, but that morning he believed me completely. I think he needed to. The police found no explanation. No fingerprints on the white presents other than the officers who handled them. No footage from the neighborhood cameras showing anyone approaching our house. No evidence of how anyone entered or exited. They never told us what was inside the 5 boxes. I asked twice and was told the contents were part of an ongoing investigation. The investigation was closed 8 months later with no findings. We moved the following spring. Different neighborhood, different town, different school for the kids. My wife and I have never discussed the details in front of them, and they have never asked, which I think means some part of them has filed it away in the same place children file things they're not ready to think about. I still think about the sound from the roof. I've thought about it probably 1,000 times. The slow, heavy scraping of something large moving above my family while we slept. I've thought about my daughter laughing in her sleep. I've thought about what could make a 5-year-old laugh like that at 3 in the morning on Christmas Eve, in a room with a locked window, with her door half open and the hallway nightlight on, surrounded by her stuffed animals and her rabbit and her Christmas dreams. I've decided I'm glad I don't know. Some things are like that,